Hi, welcome. My name's Chris. I'm a teacher of French. I specialise in teaching adult learners who have English as a first language and who are currently learning French or thinking of learning French. Now, this video is going to be a bit different for the simple reason that I won't be going off a script and I'll be ad-libbing. And the theme of this video, I don't quite know what I'm going to say yet, but the theme of this video, the general theme is that I set out to sort of try and have a conversation, a real conversation with a potential learner of French of 40, 50, 60, 70, even beyond, like sort of a face-to-face conversation in which I can impart, in which I can share a bit of my wisdom as a teacher of French. And I'm going to try and address 10 different topics. And so I've not made a script, and this is for all you 40 plus learners who are thinking of starting French or even moving to France, moving to Europe, who have English as a first language. And before we start, the very next thing I need to say is that if you are a young person viewing this channel, I can tell you it's not for you. You won't like it. And I'm saying this to prevent any sort of aggravation, nasty comments on YouTube. I'm saying it now, you're not going to like it. And the best analogy I can make, it's like walking into your local community centre and seeing the OAPs, old aged pensioners, playing Skittles and hoping for a heavy metal concert. It's not going to be a heavy metal concert. It's going to be a game of Skittles. You're not going to like it, so I'm going to spare you the time. If you're young, really, you're welcome to stay, but if I were you, I'd just move on. I wouldn't watch this. And I wouldn't leave a nasty comment either, because it's going to be a long-winded conversation. It's not going to be very funny for you, so there you are. For those of us who are still here, well, thanks, and let's go to the first question. As a reminder, I haven't prepared anything, so I'm really going to ad-lib. So the first thing I'd like to cover is, let's talk about age. And is it a factor in learning languages? Well, it really depends how you live. It really depends how you live, what your background is. To me, age as such isn't an issue. There are plenty of brilliant people of all ages sharing wisdom all over the internet, well into their 80s. This whole cognitive decline argument, I don't think it's one that has much impact on language learning. I really don't think so. You can start a language at any age, but I think the true factors are not really the state of your brain. It's rather how you've been using your brain and the sort of lifestyle you have. So by this I mean factors such as, I don't know, it might be discipline, self-discipline. If you have a lifestyle that doesn't embrace or require much self-discipline, it might be harder to get to that desk twice or three times a week and force yourself to do a bit of French. If I were to take an extreme example, imagine there are some people who watch 15 hours of television as a main hobby. Well, I would say that evidently it's going to be harder to get back into it. During my studies, when I did my degree at university, there was actually a gentleman who just retired as a high school teacher, and he'd always wanted to do a degree at university and never had the opportunity to do it. So literally the year he retired, he signed up for a master's. He literally signed up as a full-time student, a real student, no cheating, actually doing the exams, going to every lecture, took it ever so seriously. His name was Stefan. It didn't make any sort of difference. So by the time he finished, he was 70. You couldn't have made the argument that he was less sharp or less clever or less focused. I think the age argument has to do with how you live. Factors such as discipline, but also there's another big thing is the sort of the self-sabotage. And you know, it's like it's the difference, I think, between, how can I put it? It's sort of the difference between tight-roping alone and tight-roping with people jinxing you and saying fall. And I think if you are thinking of age as a factor, you might also be jinxing yourself and diminishing your potential already. Because if we approach the thing without self-confidence or with a lot of self-confidence, obviously it's going to give different results. It's going to produce different results. So in that, I think that if you're in a state of worry when you approach French, and I've seen learners in this situation, if you approach French in this state of mind saying, well, I'm probably past it, I probably can't do it, I'm not what I was, it's probably going to be harder for you, only because there's a degree of, you sort of how do you call it? It's called a self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it? It's going to be hard because I'm old, and of course it's going to be harder because you said you were old, sort of thing. But as such, I don't think that age is a factor at all. I really don't. All you need is the discipline to sit down at that desk, to do the work, to remember it, and that's it. I don't think there's any reason anyone can't do it. Learn French, I mean, I don't see why it's a factor. I really don't. I think the only true factors are your amount of self-belief and the amount of self-discipline, and obviously a lifestyle. And I take as an example, an extreme example, such as someone who's ever only watched 15 hours of television all day long, who's not used to living with any sort of discipline. It's like going back to the gym, really, isn't it? If you sat on the couch for the last 10 years, well, it's going to be a lot harder to get back to jogging or going to the gym. So in that, I think it's rather common sense and the universal principles that are the answer to that question. Now, as a second question, what do I have? The determining factors of success in a language. I would say that it's good. I think it's going to be surprising. I think the determining factors of success in learning French are not intelligence. It's rather the ability to put yourself, to own French, to claim ownership of the French language. It's a lot harder when you approach the French language sort of tiptoeing into the language, and it ties into the first point I made, the point about self-belief. If you tiptoe into the language saying, oh, I don't know if I can, I don't know if it's really for me, you have to own that language. You have to decide, it's my French, I have the right to speak French, it's my French, I claim it for myself. It's very, very important. So you have to absolutely place yourself at the center of that adventure. You're the hero of the story, is what I always tell students. You're the hero of the story, it's your French, and it's going to happen. They always say in any sort of success, qualities such as never giving up and obstination and self-belief are more important than talent. Hard work beats talent any day. You have to believe it, you have to want it, you have to believe in it. So claim French for yourself. Decide that you have the right to know French and include it in your own. If you exclude it from your person, from your lifestyle, it's going to be harder. We can make the analogy with a diet, for example. There's a simple reason diets don't work, and I'm not trying to appear wise. Everyone can figure this out for themselves. Diets don't work for the simple reason that we don't identify with the state of being fit, and that's really the only reason. It's not a question of not liking salad or, cutting down on chips. It has to do, it's more a psychological thing, even subconscious. It's an identity thing. A person who doesn't identify with being athletic or fit or is going to find it very hard to cheat their own person. There's going to be a natural resistance to this new being, to this new idea. And it's the same thing in language learning. So if you don't consider that you own French, that you have the right to speak French, that it's part of your person now, you have to view yourself as a speaker of French. You have to claim this ownership. Otherwise, if it stays exterior to your person, it's going to be very, very hard to do that work, to sit down at your desk and to force yourself to have that discipline. So the answer to that, the determining factors of success, yeah, you have to claim the language, you have to own the language, and you have to live it fully. You can't sort of half-arse it, pardon my French, but I don't think it's going to work. I think it's going to be a lot harder. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to change your whole life habits, but you have to accept yourself as a speaker of French. I mean, there are too many people on the internet who've written books about we become what we think about. We don't become a speaker of French or a doer of anything. It's like, I don't know, I have a guitar in front of me. If I don't see myself as a player of the guitar, well, it's going to be very hard for me to become one. Okay, let's move on. So that's the determining factors of success as I saw them and as I regularly see them. Frequency of learning. How many times a week or a month or a year should I learn French? Well, it's like, my answer to that is like anything else in life that you want to get good at. If you were to start, I don't know, breeding dogs, let's imagine you get into that business, I want to be a dog breeder. Well, if you go at it once a week, it's probably going to take you a long time to get good at that. We can agree on it. Learning a language just answers to the same universal principles as anything else in life that you're trying to get good at. If you do it once a week, you're going to get once a week results. If you do it twice a week, it's going to be better. If you're going to do 3 times a week. However, there is a point where you can go too far, where you get diminishing results. If you start to do French 6 times a week, 5 times a week, I think you need a resting period. A very wise lady told me that before I started university relatively late in life, and I was shaking, I was terrified, I had no idea what awaited me. I had no method, no nothing, and I asked her, she was just about my age group, and she'd done a similar thing before me, so she started university closer to her 30s than the traditional 18, 19 years old, and she did really well. So I asked her, I said, well, any advice, give me any sort of advice, am I working enough, am I doing enough? Because to me, I always had to produce more to be sure to pass. And she said, university also means not doing anything, and what she meant is you need to rest. It's like a muscle, you need to rest the muscle to make it grow. So too much is too much, and not enough isn't enough at all. But I think as a starting figure, I would advise at least twice a week, and 3 times a week might be ideal. Right, question number 4. Type of learning. I wanted to talk about that. What type of learning should I be doing? So we know that there are podcasts, we know that some people say listen to films, we say that some people have a conversation partner, we know that some people say go and buy a traditional grammar book, other people watch YouTube videos and watch a YouTube teacher teach you French. What should I be doing? What type of learning should I be doing? Are there different types of learners? Honestly, I don't know. I've never had a definite answer about the existence of different types of learners. I couldn't say. I really couldn't say. Some people are more analytical, visual, some people need to hear. Possibly, I don't know. Possibly, really, I don't know. The only thing that I do know regarding the different types of learning, and that strongly influenced my own teaching, is the argument of strategy. To me, having a strategic approach to French is more important than what we do. And I don't think that listening to a podcast is very strategic, because it's going to be very random. Your learning is going to be very random, and there are going to be areas of the language that you cover less or even not at all, because you can only ever, well, let's imagine for the sake of argument that you understand 100% of what your podcast is telling you, and that 100% of the conversation on your podcast or on your Netflix film transforms into real active knowledge. Let's just pretend, because we do know it's not true. If we take 60 minutes of listening, I don't know, what's the realistic proportion of what you walk away with? You've listened to something for 60 minutes. How many new words, how many different rules of grammar do you know? How many different formulas, call it what you want, of French can you walk away with and claim as your own and say, okay, I started my film, I didn't know this. I ended my film, I do know this. Or same thing for a podcast, same thing for a conversation with, we call them tandem partners, conversation exchange partners. Well, the answer is impossible to determine. It really is. What are you learning? What are you skipping? What are you not learning? What are you not learning enough of? And to me, the strategic approach is the best one, because you know that you've covered the main verbs in a certain tense, you've covered the main, the prepositions. Let's just talk about prepositions. There's a number of prepositions in French. Well, by listening to the podcast, you might not know them all, or you don't quite know when they're going to come your way, because really you depend on the flow of their conversation. And I think there are many areas of the language that you will absolutely skip. I just think it's not strategic. I would never learn a language like that. And I like to speak very factually. If I were to start Swedish tomorrow, would I start to watch Swedish films? Likely not. Likely not, because Swedish films don't answer the questions I want to know about Swedish. I want to know factual things like how many sounds do they have, how does Swedish match up with English, do they have a similar system of tenses, do they have, and maybe later on I'll listen to Swedish films, maybe. But I don't believe that listening to someone transforms into knowledge. I really don't think so. I think the clever thing to do, the most strategic thing to do, is build up your own knowledge, and you will recognize your knowledge in other people. Whatever you learn in French or in any language, you will be focusing on yourself, building up your little pyramid of knowledge. You're building your little house. I don't know why I said pyramid, but you're building your little house. Maybe because it sounds more grand, I don't know. But you will recognize your knowledge in other people. I've done it myself. You don't have to depend on others. No one has ever proven that by listening to someone, it will teach you anything. And the same goes for speaking. A lot of people seem to think that speaking is the tool by which we learn. Whoever said that? Why? Why is this a thing? To me, anyone can speak French. You have the ability to speak French. That's not the problem. You have the ability to do that, to communicate in French. That's not where the issue lies. The issue lies rather in, well, knowing what the correct sounds of French are, knowing how to structure a sentence, knowing what tense to choose, all these things that you have to learn. And once you learn them, well, you can start speaking French in a matter of hours or days. Or there is a certain muscle that you'll have to train from your thought to the vocal manifestation of your thought, and it's like a sort of like a reflex motion. You know, the more you do it, the quicker you speak. Okay, but you can acquire this very quickly. It's not going to happen that you, for example, know all the grammar, all the tenses of French, but you still can't speak 2 years later because the sounds just aren't coming out. That will not happen. Why would it happen? So that the real issue, the strategic issue, is not so much speaking, it's really learning the French and going straight towards it. Because if you're dependent on a podcast or a random conversation with someone, well, you're going to have to wait to encounter that specific point of French that you don't know, put it on pause, try to learn it, which essentially means that you're learning anyway. So why not go straight to the traditional learning instead of doing a different type of learning, put it on pause and going towards traditional learning anyway? It seems like a waste of time to me, but that's just me, and the point of this video is just to advise learners of French. And I'm not saying I'm 100% right, but I can just speak about what I've seen work. So let's talk about grammar now. Should I know French grammar? Okay, French grammar has a bad reputation, as in any grammar. There are several reasons for that, especially if you come from the English language. You likely don't know much grammar, simply because it's that type of language. We don't speak about grammar very much in the English-speaking teaching tradition, America, UK. It's just not that type of thing. But French is comparatively a lot more grammatical, meaning that the average speaker of French knows a lot more about grammar than speakers of English. A simple question might be, what is the direct object of the sentence, John has a dog? The average speaker of English might not know the answer to that. French speakers, I can guarantee, all know the answer. Of course, the answer is a dog. But there are French speakers, if you tell them, give me an example of this tense or that tense, they will be able to tell you. I can also guarantee that speakers of English can't. It's not less good, it's just very different. So a lot of speakers of English approach French with that frame of mind, in which grammar doesn't matter, because I'm going to learn French the same way as I learned English, which means essentially without putting much emphasis in knowing the names of the technical terms or knowing the rules. How many speakers of English have you heard say, my grammar is awful? It's a thing, it's a cultural thing, and we chuckle about it. Oh, I have my terrible grammar. But it's almost like a badge of honour in a sense. It's I know how to speak English. People say they speak English as natives, they know that, but they willingly admit that their grammar is awful. It's like a little cultural thing, isn't it? We laugh about it. But for French, I would definitely recommend a minimal amount of grammar, because otherwise, you risk navigating in the dark. You don't need much grammar, but you will be navigating in the dark. And I would recommend, at a minimum, knowing what a verb is, knowing what an adjective is, an adverb, you need to distinguish those two. A pronoun also, so nouns, adjectives, adverbs, pronouns, you should know what those are. And I wouldn't say prepositions, you need to recognize and name them. I wouldn't say that you need to do that for conjunctions or articles, but I think I've named them all. Which are the ones I have to know? Nouns, pronouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, and then we have conjunctions, prepositions, and article/determiners. I don't think you have to name and know them. I don't think you have to be able to say, oh, that's not a conjunction, that's a preposition. I don't think it's necessary. But those five definitely. And you also have to know what a modal verb is, you have to know what the names of the tenses are, you have to know what an auxiliary is. There's about 10 or 12 terms that you would have to know in French. That's what I think, if only to understand what you're doing. Otherwise it's you're navigating in the dark. You really are. And you wouldn't be able to self-correct. You wouldn't be able to approach French with any degree of inside knowledge. You'd be repeating phrases and really not knowing what you're exactly doing. So I would say that a minimal amount of grammar is necessary when learning French, because it is that type of language. It's not like English. It's not a language you can just repeat. Learning by immersion, let's talk about that. Is it possible, let's talk factually, is it possible to go to France, learn French just by sauntering through the streets and exchanging occasionally with people you meet? Is the old sink or swim method likely to work? Well, let's think about it. Let's think about it factually. I would say no. I would say no. And if it does work, let's look at the results. I would like anyone to show me any speaker of French who's never taken a class in their life, and within 2, 3, 4 years came to speak beautiful, perfect French, even 80% good French. I'd love to see that. I don't include teenagers, because teenagers, of course, that's a factor also. If you're 40, 50, 60, likely you're not hanging out with people all the time, are you? You have a lot more alone time. We know that young people, teenagers, the centre of their life is their friends, their phone, they're always exchanging, so it's a lot easier for a young person to go to France with very few lessons and start to develop a use of French a lot quicker than an adult could, but just because of the amount of exposure they have. Even then I would be curious to see the results. I don't think it will always be very good, or at least academically good. Let's imagine the case of a young person going to France, just picking up French with their friends. Would they be able to pass an exam in a French school? A French exam, I mean, writing a proper essay, using the correct vocabulary according to the register, the correct situation? I don't know. Stylistically, would their French be any good? I don't know. I'd have serious doubts. I would have serious doubts. What I've seen happen when you learn by immersion is, I tell my students, it's funny, because whether you're really advanced in French or a complete beginner, in a sense you always come back to the starting line, because you really have to revise the basics. What happens when you live abroad in France, you get to know the more technical words, because you're confronted to a different type of reality. For example, dealing with an electrician, going to the local council, the mairie, you learn some very technical words that belong to that French reality, so you have an advantage there. It's a lot harder if you live in America or in England to start teaching these words to a learner who isn't confronted to that reality. But for example, I don't know, talking about a membership at the local swimming pool, there might be some technical terms involved. It's harder to learn those if you're not yet in France. However, it isn't a disadvantage necessarily, because what you can already do at home is learn the rules that hold French together, the basics, the French language. Like, let's imagine the picture of a tree. You know, there are the big branches and the smaller branches. What you can do is learn the structure of French, the big branches. Obviously, the more specific you get, the tinier the branches, and that's where you get to the specialized vocabulary. But you can certainly build a very solid trunk in French and learn what's important, what holds the language together. So learning by immersion, also the argument I have against it, comes down to statistics and strategy. Statistically, you would have to have so many conversations about so many different topics to cover so many different facets of the language. Let's take the passive as an example. Over the course of a year, imagine that you talk every day, you speak every day with someone in French. Would you be exposed necessarily to the passive in French? And this means when you place the focus of the sentence on the thing that's not doing the action. It's the difference between John is looking at the bird is being looked at by John. So you've put the focus on the bird, the emphasis on the bird, which isn't doing anything. Could you learn that just by being in France and speaking to people? Would you know all the cases? Do you think you would learn I think it's 7 or 8 cases in which you can't do that in French. You have to bring in the dummy pronoun on. In English you can say I was written to, but you can't do that in French. You have to bring in on sort of as a dummy pronoun. Would you encounter all those cases in all the tenses? I don't know. I really have doubts about that. Another thing that happens when you learn by immersion is that people don't correct you. And we fall into this sort of sub-reality in which the learner thinks they're doing great. The locals are forgiving because they hear that you're foreign and they sort of understand, okay, well, they speak as a foreigner. Okay, we understand you, but they'll never correct you. But they know that you're foreign, that you have a very uncertain type of grammar, and I'm using grammar in the sense of the proper rules of French. They'll understand. And they won't correct you. They really won't. First of all, because it breaks up the flow of the conversation, and it's also perceived as being rude. No one wants to be corrected at every sentence, so it won't happen. So learning by immersion, yes, you will learn technical terms. Yes, you will read shop signs and things like that. You'll be exposed to more genuine French, but the question is, will it transform into active knowledge? And will you know the basics better? I don't know. It's all about the active tools you have. Being exposed is all well and good, but how much of that transforms into an active tool which is linguistically correct also? Because you might be exposed to tools by immersion that are not linguistically correct. You might still have a dreadful accent. I don't like to use the word dreadful, but so everyone knows what I mean. You might have no understanding of the tenses. You might recognize it in other people, but not quite know why they're using this tense rather than the other. So I have serious doubts about learning by immersion. The next thing I'd like to talk about is how to choose a teacher. How to choose a teacher. Now, that's a hard one. I think it's like, I think learners of languages have to understand that they really are stepping into an industry that they don't understand. How could they? It's like stepping into any industry, choosing a doctor, choosing a dentist, choosing a gardener. What's the difference between one and the other? And it's a very hard thing to choose the right teacher. It really is. Some people would choose the local language school just because it's close. Other people will choose something that's just by looking at the reviews, and 10,000 other people have chosen that, so it must be good, so I'll choose that one also. I think the number one rule in choosing a teacher is, do you believe in them? To me, that's very, very important. There's a very unique relationship between teacher and learner that is based on respect and mutual esteem, mutual respect. If you don't have respect for your teacher, it's not going to work. It's like a sacred bond. You must have pride in your teacher. You must believe in them. And the second you challenge the credibility, the credentials of your teacher, then that bond is broken. It's never going to work again. And I'd almost go as far as to say, it doesn't even matter if your teacher's right. You have to believe they're right. If you have the slightest doubt about the credentials of your teacher, it's not going to work. So I think anyone has to choose a teacher in whom they believe, and of whom they think, this is the person who can bring me to that level. And it doesn't matter even if it works or not. It's almost like learning by, what do you call it? It's learning by, it's almost like a psychological trick of learning by suggestion. It's almost like a magic trick, you know, self-suggestion. And what I mean is, if you find that right person, if you find that person, that special person who can coach you and place that sense of trust in you, and who believes in your results and who makes you believe in your own results, then it's going to work. But if you have doubts about your teacher, it's not going to work as well. And it's a very delicate thing. The slightest dent in the armor, the slightest chink in the armor, and the relationship is ruined. That would be my main advice, because it's very hard to go by quality. It's very hard to say, well, this teacher's a good one, that one isn't a good one. What does it depend on? You have to be sure that you found the teacher who can bring you to the level you want to be at. That would be my main advice. You have to respect your teacher, you have to believe in them, you have to be proud of them, and you have to be sure that they can bring you to that level. Yeah. And ideally you shouldn't question them, because it's not going to work. If I had a teacher of a foreign language and after my lesson I went and said, oh, they don't really know, do they? They're a bit, oh, yeah. The spell is broken. You need that spell, you really do. That's my advice on that. Next thing I'd like to talk about is what does it mean to learn French? Wow. I think we have to be aware that there are many variables. There are many variables when it comes to learning French. There are many definitions that you can place on the act of learning French. It's something we don't always talk about, and we feel that we understand instinctively. What do you mean? What does it mean to learn French? I know what it means to learn French. It means going to a French class and being involved in French. Yes, but I think there are different degrees of quality to this. There are different levels. To me, learning French is not... There's a difference between attending a class and actually walking out of the class with something you can call your own, something quantifiable, a real skill, real quantifiable progress. And that's what I call learning French. It's not simply being involved in French or watching a film. You have to know what you've actually learned. You need to know how much better you are after the class as you were before the class. That, to me, means learning French, moving towards a target, a goal, learning new skills, improving. Otherwise, because there's a difference between being involved in French and actually learning and making progress and being better than last week. And I'll be saying something about the teaching industry as a last question here today. Next, we'll talk about how to memorize French. That's a question I get very often also, how to memorize French. I'd say that here you have to decide which option makes the most sense to you, and I'll come back with the argument of strategy. What is the most strategic way to learn French? And I have come to understand that there's only two options. To memorize French, there's A, hoping it happens, B, making it happen. And that's the only thing. You can expose yourself to French and hoping that French somehow gets memorized in your brain just by watching films and somehow it happens, or just going towards it, memorizing those words, cutting out your little French words or sticking little pieces of paper all over the room and actively memorizing those words. It's going to take quite a long time just looking around this room to name every single object in this room. And just by exposing ourselves to French, it's going to take, you're going to miss some. A lot of them are going to be missed, and we won't address all of them, and we won't know all of them. So I think that the quickest option is just opening a vocabulary book. You can buy them online. They're cheap as chips. Buy yourself a little vocabulary book. Force your way into the force learn it. Really force learn it. I think it's the easiest way to do it, just to force learn things. There's a part of understanding, that's rather the grammar, to know how the language functions, but there's also a part of memorizing. And when it comes to memorizing, I think you just have to force learn. it's the quickest way. It might not be the most fun way, but it's the quickest way. That's what I've seen. Can I learn French in a year or less? I love that question. Honestly, yeah. Honestly, yeah. Yeah. Again, it depends how you live. It depends on your focus. It depends on how we define learning French. But if you want to get to that first stage of knowing all the minimal skills, because I visualize French in stages. There's this first stage, and I see just about I see what it contains, the tenses it contains, the skills you need. I see what it contains. That first stage of French allows you to survive. It allows you to ask questions, to say that this belongs to me, to express an opinion. This belongs to you, that belongs to me, the possessives. It enables you to ask questions. It enables you to have an understanding of how French is supposed to sound, the present tense, the past tense. Can you do it in a year? Yes, you can do it in 6 months if you like. We can do a lot of things very, very quickly when it comes to language learning, certainly. I don't quite know what to answer other than that, but I think a lot of it has to do with the unfortunate experience in school that we all had. I think we have been trained subconsciously to accept the idea that any type of learning takes years. And we approach French or languages in general with the almost subconscious assumption that it's going to take years and it's going to be very hard. But it's going to be very hard to achieve French in 6 months if we already believe that it can't be done, or if we don't even consider this option. For example, there's a past tense for which I have only one PDF. It's sort of a long one. It holds in about 10 pages. But rationally, there's no reason why you couldn't start it in the morning and finish it in the evening. There is no reason why you couldn't learn this brand new past tense in 3 or 4 days. What's preventing you? Nothing. I can't think of a single valid reason why a person couldn't learn this past tense in 3 or 4 days. By which I mean on the first day they learn it, second, third day they just improve their knowledge of it, repeat what they've already learned. There's no reason you can't do it. And if you think in these terms, well, within 2 months you've covered all the French tenses, then all you need to do is learn the rest that takes you to that first plateau, that first step. It can go very quickly, but it has to do with our self-belief and what we think is possible. We all know the story of that athlete who broke the 100-meter record, and within months everyone was breaking it. It's just that people believed it wasn't possible. So learning French in a year, yeah, definitely. And I'll have to add something to that. There are many videos online of many people learning a huge number of languages, and they seem to have all the tricks, and they seem to be very inspiring, and but their circumstances aren't your own, and I think they can be quite confusing. These people, I mean, they as much as they inspire, but they can also be quite intimidating. I'm thinking of this fellow Steve Kaufman, and he seems to speak a number of languages, and he's absolutely passionate about it. But for me, therein lies the issue. He is passionate. So in a sense, his results are meaningless to us, because we are not at that level of passion. Obviously, he would achieve so many languages because that's what he loves to do. But for a regular person who has a moderate interest in French, or even a very low interest in French, I still believe you can learn it within 6, or learn a lot, I mean, the basic skills within 6 months or a year. But for this to happen, you have to focus on yourself. You have to just do the work twice or 3 times a week, and grind away and knock down the blocks of knowledge and make your way there. But it is possible, yeah. And as a final question, the teaching industry, how does it work? And this ties into how How to choose a teacher, how does it all work? It's a funny thing, the teaching industry. It's not a thing we talk about very much, and I will be making a full-length video on the teaching industry. What is it as an industry? I think students don't know that there isn't, it's quite interesting actually. Do you know there isn't a school or a company in which everyone aspires to work? There isn't the best of the best. And this means a lot. There isn't one school that's that good that they found out something that anyone else hadn't figured out. There's no teacher that whoever says, oh, I wish I could work for them, they're the best, they're the very best, they're the absolute gold standard. It doesn't exist. So it's an industry that's made out of, well, it's a bit like the plumbing industry, I would imagine. There's many individual plumbers, but there's not one super best plumbing company. It's the same sort of thing. And so you phone up your local plumber, hoping it's a good plumber, hoping they're an honest plumber, but it's the same sort of thing. There isn't a very best versus a very worst. Now, what I know about the teaching industry is I think we can make two large groups within the teaching industry. It's from what I've seen. You have the well-intentioned teachers, you know, and then you have the sort of the business people. So you have the teachers who've opened their local language school, and on the side of the spectrum you have the hardline business people, you know, the sharks, who are specifically designed to be international companies. I'm thinking of Preply, I'm thinking of this other company, italki, obviously, I'm thinking of Mango Languages. So for some reason, I don't know why, some business people decided language learning was good business, and they decided to open language schools. And I even had a job interview with Mango Languages. I think I know what it's like from the inside. We could make two separate camps. There's the well-intentioned teachers, your average teacher who's opened a local language school and who employs a number of freelance teachers, because you should know also that when you go into a language school you can be pretty sure that they're all freelance teachers, which to me is a big issue, because I'm a business owner myself, and I know that the first person I hire, their passion wouldn't even be a fraction of my own. So this, to me, it poses the problem of buying the product, but it's sort of a diluted version of the product simply because you're not learning from the owner of the business. It's not even close to the same level of passion. So we have to know that schools employ teachers on a freelance basis, and the teachers don't have that level of passion or even caring. I don't think they might enjoy the profession as such, but I don't see why they would go above and beyond to please the customer, knowing it's not their company, knowing it's badly paid, and knowing they're only freelance. I would actually ask that question if I were to do lessons. How do you pay your teachers? Are they employees, or are they, it makes a big difference, or are they freelance? So you have your well-intentioned local teachers who've opened a language school, and then you have more like the business people. I'm thinking of, you know, the italkis of this world, the Mango Languages. I can see the two brothers in their suits, you know, millionaires 20 times over, in you know, the real hardline business shark sort of people. I actually had an interview with them years ago, and it was interesting doing the interview in English with the two secretaries there interviewing me, and they themselves could barely speak English, or they could, let's be honest, but not very well. And it's sort of odd if you're a language school representing a passion for languages and not really speaking that well anyway. It makes me wonder why they don't use their own product, but that's another story. However well-intentioned or however business-like your source of learning is, well, one side of the spectrum, it's the schools that were specifically designed to get big and to go international and to be international references. But interestingly, even those biggest schools don't have the best method. They just have the ability to sign more contracts. They just have the ability to, I don't know, people, they're people who know people, who get contracts done. I'm thinking of World Educate, that big school. And then you have your local schools, but I think in terms of quality, it's all the same. Another thing I would underline about the teaching industry is, as a customer, I think students should know that not every language school is in the business of teaching languages. Obviously they are, on a surface level, but we have to know how to interpret this. They do teach languages, but their core business could very well be something else. For example, offering a moment of weekly fun to their students. That's really their core business. So in a sense, it doesn't really matter if you're learning well or even learning at all. And I did my teacher training in one of those, in such a language school. I didn't know anything about language teaching back then. I was just finishing my degree. It's quite interesting because even when you do a degree, you go to a language school, you don't quite know what you're seeing, you don't quite know what you're looking at. But I had suspicions, and I thought, wow, it doesn't seem very structured. He's doing that, he's asking to do the test from 3 weeks ago, they're doing one other exercise, now they're watching a video on the big screen. What's going on here? And I didn't know what I was looking at, but looking back, of course, now I do, at least a lot better. And I realized that their core business was just offering a nice moment to, it's a hobby. It's a pleasurable moment to people who want to do a bit of French once a week. And it should be known that there are different types of classes. Not every language school is in the business of giving you, making it happen, making French happen for you, giving you the French language. They're not all selling that. A lot of, and I've in England, I worked for a language school like that also. I can still see the learners in front of me, the students in front of me. And you quickly come to the realization that you start off with 10 pupils, but some of them skip 2 lessons, come back 2 lessons later, they haven't been. And then you understand that it's their purpose is just to do a bit of French as a hobby. And it's going to matter for 2 months in their life, and then they're going to move on and do something else, which is good. But I would advise anyone to choose a source of learning knowingly, and to know that some sources of learning, some schools, some teachers are really in the business of making French happen for you, more like a fitness coach sort of thing. So yeah, the teaching industry, mainly well-intentioned people. A few, especially in the internet era, and I think even in the physical world, I don't think there's any sort of regulation if a person wants to open a language school wherever you live, in your local town. Why not? Whoever from the council or from whoever decides on these things is going to say, do you have a license to operate a language school? I really don't think so. I could be wrong, but I really don't think so. I think it might actually be harder to open a hairdressing salon than a language school. And especially in the era of internet, anyone with an internet connection can set up as a teacher. And the difficulty is to know, well, who's who? How do I separate the wheat from the chaff? It really is the Achilles heel of every language school I've ever seen. It's always on freelance basis, and the interest of the owner is never the same interest as the freelance teacher, which offers you a diluted service. Okay, well, this concludes this video. It's a bit of a long video. I hope it answered some questions. I didn't have a script, which is probably why it's so long. Thank you very much for watching. I hope I answered some of your questions. I'm Chris, I'm a real teacher in real reality, and I really do teach French to learners who speak English as a first language, 40 plus and beyond. Contact me anytime. I'm always happy to speak to you. Bye. Thanks for watching.